In the world of streaming, the easiest way to think about your PC and what parts you need are think about the GPU handling your game and how good that looks, and the CPU handles everything else. Now that's obviously a super simplified way of looking at things, and a lot of it depends on the settings that you're playing your games at, as well as the games that you're playing. That's just the very high level version of it. And obviously, while the GPU is extremely important, the CPU plays a massive role when it comes to actually streaming too. But I'll have some resources for the GPU here at the end of the video. I want to talk about the CPU first. Cheers to all the other YouTube channels out there that are talking to you about gaming computers and not streaming computers. The CPU is pretty important on a streaming computer. Cheers. Now, the other thing that I always want to clarify when we're talking about these types of requirements for streaming PCs is that most CPUs can stream. It really comes down to how well can it stream. And the biggest things to look at when you're talking about the CPU or the processor of your computer is the number of cores and threads on the CPU and the speed at which those cores are running at. For the most part, the more cores and threads that you have running at higher speeds, the smoother your stream is going to be and the less lag that you're going to encounter. All right, I'm going to give you the quick explain it like I'm 5 rundown of how processors are named, ranked, and how things like the 14th Gen i7 compares to a Ryzen 7 9000 series. If you're already familiar with the benefits and the different naming schemes, feel free to skip ahead to the different chapters to see actual recommendations for different products. But if you're not familiar with these, it might be good to have this little 101 course. So let's talk first about the generation. How new or old is this processor that we're talking about? Almost every single year, Intel and AMD both come out with their new generation of processors. Intel has just released their Core Ultra line of processors, which right now is the 2nd generation in this kind of lineup. They just finished up with the 14th generation of their Intel Core i series of processors. And AMD is currently on their Ryzen 9000 series of processors, following up their not as popular 8000 series and their wildly popular 7000 series that you've probably heard of. You can see the generation on both AMD and Intel processors on the first number of their model number. All right, now let's talk about the performance tiers. Intel had their staple i3, i5, i7, and i9 tiers, but now has an even simpler Core Ultra 5, 7, and 9, dropping that 3 series tier. AMD very similarly has their own Ryzen 3, 5, 7, and 9 tiers. Makes it pretty easy to understand that way. The way that I like to think about these tiers is a level 3 is for absolute basic computing. Think about word processing, checking your email, and browsing the web. Don't even think about a 3-tier processor if you're planning on doing any streaming. The 5 tier is doable, but this is the tier that you're going to want to make sure that you're getting something a little bit newer, and you're going to want to make sure that the games that you're playing aren't nearly as intense, or you're literally running only something like OBS, no other extras running on your PC. The 7 tier is where things actually get serious. Plenty of cores and threads to get the streaming job done. This is typically where I recommend most streamers sit. This is the spot where you're going to get the best performance, the performance that you need for the price that's not too unbearable. The 9 tier is typically a little bit overkill, but if you've got the budget, these have the power to get the job done. This is also the range where you might be able to look at some older types of processors if you're okay with something like that to really get that job done. at an affordable price. And finally, we've got the suffixes of the processor names. This is the letter at the end of the model number. Of course, each brand is completely different when it comes to these, but the important ones that you need to know for Intel are the K, which means this is unlocked and typically a bit more powerful, as well as available for overclocking. And F means that there is no built-in display components on this processor. You need your own GPU if you are going to have this computer function. AMD similarly has an X on their processors, which signifies their enhanced and more powerful version of the same CPU, as well as the G, which denotes that this processor does come with integrated graphics. And you don't need a separate GPU for this PC to function. And then of course, you have the very popular X3D suffix, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Now, obviously, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to knowing everything there is to know about CPUs. But this should at least be enough to get you on the right track. Let's get on to the actual recommendations for what's actually out there right now. Now we're going to start with our recommendations for Intel CPUs because for the most part, Intel processors are just better at tasks outside of gaming. I know I mentioned the most important things for streaming were the cores, the threads, and those speeds, but even when all of those are identical between Intel and AMD, Intel typically still wins out. Whether it's because of price, whether it's because of those optimizations that different software developers have added to their applications, Intel just typically wins out. So that's why if you look at the plethora of PC builds that I've done on my channel here, when they're done for streamers, they typically include Intel processors. All right, so let's first talk about the newest, the Core Ultra line of processors. Now, these are definitely the newest, which means they're going to be supported for the longest amount of time. They're also the most expensive because they're the newest. And Intel wants you to think that they're the most powerful. But once you look at a few third-party benchmarks, it's not typically the case especially when you're looking at the previous 14th generation processors that were really, really good. Now, I really do believe that with some different software and microcode updates that these processors could eventually end up winning out. They're going to be supported for the longest, so if you want the absolute top of the line, newest, most future-proof type of processor, these might be the way to go, but I'm not recommending them to most people yet. In the Intel lineup, you also still have the 13th and 14th generation processors. These are probably the best. They're going to be the most efficient, the least expensive for the power that you're going to be getting. This is what I recommend for most people right now, as long as you can get past the issues that they were having a couple of months ago. If you're going to buy one of these processors, immediately update the BIOS on your motherboard and honestly hope for the best. But what that means in the meantime is you're going to get the best processors for streaming and content creation for some really low prices, because there are still a lot of people out there that don't trust these. These are some of those processors I probably wouldn't recommend buying used unless you know where they're coming from, unless you know that they're not experiencing issues right now. But if you're buying it, if you're still buying it sealed, these are some really good options. And now, if you want what I think right now is some of the best value money can buy, is the 12th generation i7 and i9 processors. Still plenty for most people, still perfect. I personally have an i9 12900K in my computer, and I have seen no reasons to upgrade yet. They're going to be the absolute cheapest because they're the oldest, because they're going to be the out of date the soonest, but they're still absolutely great today. They're also some of the cheapest systems that you can build because they are a little bit older. They're still compatible with systems that are built with DDR4 memory, which can make the entire build a little bit cheaper. If you absolutely need to build the best system for the lowest price possible, look at a 12th generation i7 or i9 processor. The other nice thing about these is you don't have to worry about the issues that the 13th and 14th generation processors were seeing. These are safe bets for solid computers right now. And anything older than the 12th generation as far as Intel processors are concerned is something that I just can't in good conscience recommend for most people. Will it get the job done? Are you able to use an 11th generation i7 or i9? Absolutely. But you can't buy them new anymore, and they're really starting to show their age at this point. All right, let's move on to AMD and what everybody has been waiting for, the X3D processors. They're the best, right? I see that in every single Reddit thread about computer building. Go for the 7800 X3D. So with these processors, you've got the absolute brand new, super expensive, impossible to find 9800 X3D. You've got the almost same price, 2 years older, and still just as hard to find 7800 X3D, as well as the quite a bit older 5700 X3D. These processors are the best for gaming. When you're talking about gaming, these processors are the best. Outside of any task other than gaming, they are definitely not the best. Again, not that they can't get the job done, it's just there's better options for a lot less money. These processors right now have gone up, way up in price because of the issues that Intel has been having, because of the not so great launch that the Intel Core Ultra processors have been having. And most people are building these types of PCs for gaming, not necessarily for streaming and content creation. But if you want the best processor for gaming, go with one of these. Now, outside of the X3D processors, if you're solely building this computer to be a streaming computer, the Ryzen 9000 series of processors are actually pretty solid. Again, a lot of people consider this launch to be not so great, but these really improved efficiencies on these processors without losing any performance, gaining quite a bit. When you consider the price differences as well. So they're also the newest. They just released a couple of months ago. They're probably your best bang for your buck right now, honestly. The Ryzen 7 9700X is probably the CPU that I recommend the most right now as far as AMD processors. And it's probably going to be the one that I recommend the most this year if you want to stick with AMD. It's actually what I put in my Dragon Age PC a couple of months ago, and it performed absolutely fantastic. And we can't forget completely about the 6000 and 8000 series AMD processors, but we don't hear much about them. They're kind of that weird step sibling. These are typically the tweaked versions of the previous generations that are supposed to be a bit more efficient, but these are also the ones that they always include the integrated graphics, and that typically just takes away your processing power for something that you're getting a GPU to do anyways, so they just haven't been big hits. The 5000 and the 7000 series, though, are where you should be sticking. These are a lot more mainstream popular, and they can be great choices for your streaming PC. For its age, the Ryzen 7 5700 X3D still holds its own in gaming, but for productivity, you're definitely going to be better off looking at one of the Ryzen 9 tier processors, especially on these older models. Something like the Ryzen 9 7950X or similar. Now, in the end, all of these CPUs, again, will work. It all depends on how well you want it to work and what your budget ends up being. Make sure that you figure out what is going to be the best for you. What games are you actually playing? What applications are most important for you? And then use your resources to figure it out. Tom's Hardware has an amazing tier list and benchmarks. User benchmarks is great for comparing specific CPUs. I'll link both of those down below. Not to mention, somebody on YouTube, I guarantee it, has benchmarked those two CPUs that you're looking at side by side already. If you need any more help, make sure you drop into the Devin Does Tech Discord server, which is also going to be linked below. There's lots of amazing people in there that are always happy to help out. All right, now that you've picked out your perfect CPU for your new build, it's time to find the right GPU. I've gone over those in this video over here. We'll see you over there.